Super Lucky Disaster Man. Chapter 37, How to Get a Great Detective Novel. Komaeda Nagito's eyes lit up, and he immediately responded, asking the other party which author it was. However, this person named Little Raccoon didn't continue responding. Instead, others replied to Komaeda Nagito. OP, don't chase after it anymore. That person might actually be Little Raccoon-san himself. Someone tried to contact him before for publishing, but couldn't reach him, sent messages with no reply, sent invites and got ignored. I know he's very proud, but I never thought he would personally respond to something like this. He hasn't replied much since last year. Why is he suddenly appearing now? Probably triggered by something in real life. As the replies continued, people started talking among themselves. It seemed they were all familiar with the Little Raccoon, which suggested that the Little Raccoon was somewhat famous on the forum. Komaeda Nagito asked humbly, "Excuse me, has Little Raccoon-san ever created any works before? I couldn't find anything in their works section." An enthusiastic netizen replied, "He deleted them all last year." Exactly, last year, as if something had triggered him. For a few months there was no activity at all, and everyone thought he was done for, but then after finally coming back, he deleted all his posts. A lot of people speculate if he was defeated by someone in real life. Because based on the details he revealed before, people guess that his real-life profession might be a detective. Such a pity, he was clearly a super prolific author, not publishing anything for a year. He must have accumulated a lot of works, but now they won't be posted here anymore. It might not necessarily be a loss in reality, it could simply be that he didn't think about posting it online, instead preparing for publication. Komaeda Nagito looked seriously at this information, organizing it internally before concluding that Kudo Shinichi definitely must have registered on this forum. In other words, the Little Raccoon, who had previously posted novels, Kudo-kun had probably seen it as well. To replies to it himself in this post, with the members of the forum teased him, and he didn't refute it either, which indicated that this, Little Raccoon's, work was indeed of high quality. Someone even commented that his level was not far off from that of Conan Doyle of England. If that's the case, Komaeda Nagito became even more invested. Thus, Komaeda Nagito quickly made a decision, sending a message to the Little Raccoon. The message content was very sincere and straightforward, expressing his wish to repay the person who made the request, but he seemed somewhat helpless regarding his current state. He then admitted that he hadn't read a single word of the other party's works, yet still calmly based his response on his friends' reactions and his own deductions, flattering the work with over 500 words of praise. In the end, he humbly asked if there was still any way to see Little Raccoon's works, and if they were published, whether there were any unpublished or recently written works that hadn't been posted online. He didn't even write this long for his English essays. 10 minutes later, Komaeda Nagito refreshed the page and found that his message had been read but not replied to. Well, this was pretty much within expectations. Talented people often have peculiar tempers or a bit of arrogance, which is normal. Fortunately, Komaeda Nagito wasn't alone. With a keyword search, he found many people posting threads asking how to contact Little Raccoon. Among these posters were scholars, fans, editors, and so on. Afterward, someone actually posted a guide. If you really want him to reply, it's very simple. Just give him a challenging detective puzzle. I have sent it, but he still didn't come back to me. The content is as follows, XXXX. Yours is too simple, I could guess halfway through it, it wouldn't enter his eyes at all. I also sent one, it was about a murder case in a chaotic neighborhood under my jurisdiction from 3 years ago. He replied in less than 10 minutes, and the answer was correct. He even conveniently guessed my place of residence. Komaeda Nagito reviewed all these successful and failed tutoring cases and summarized his experiences. Normally, detective mysteries more or less cannot move Little Raccoon. Whether it's fictional, based on a true story, or directly an unsolved strange case, it still needs to be on a highly sophisticated level to do so. However, this sophisticated level, possibly due to the overall decline in literary standards in this world, would be fairly common in the world that Komaida Nagito remembers. Just delving a bit into those memories of another world makes Komaida Nagito's head start to ache faintly again. He endured for a moment, letting the sudden burst of pain pass, then continued to ponder what to do next as if nothing had happened. Komaida Nagito considered for a while, feeling that writing a novel was a bit laborious, especially when he tried to recall memories from another world, which only gave him a headache. With that effort, it would be better to just directly let Kudo-kun see it, rather than wasting this opportunity dealing with little Raccoon-san. It was better to stick to the true-to-life route, wasn't that readily available? So he called his long uncontacted former neighbor, Ayatsuji Yukito. Originally thought that there would be no further contact with Ayatsuji Yukito, but unexpectedly received a phone call from Komaida Nagito, who repeated in confusion, "An interesting yet complex case suitable for a detective? Why do you need something like that?" Komaida Nagito said rather embarrassedly, "I want to impress a detective novelist with a unique personality. Normal puzzles won't do, so I thought Ayatsuji-sensei might have some cases that meet the conditions, so I called to ask for help." I was planning to help sensei, but instead ended up coming to ask for help instead. I know I start from the beginning. Ayatsuji Yukito, who had finally managed a moment of silence, felt a familiar headache returning. "Why did you suddenly want to persuade the other party? Do you really like detective novels?" Komaida Nagito then recounted how Kudo Shinichi had helped him find a place to stay and later made this request as repayment. As Ayatsuji Yukito listened, he realized that the root of the matter could be traced back to himself. If it hadn't been for him killing off those dozen or so criminals on the island, the special division wouldn't have come to monitor him, Komaida Nagito wouldn't have had to move immediately, wouldn't have struggled to find a suitable place to stay, Kudo Shinichi wouldn't have needed to help him find one, and he wouldn't have owed Kudo Shinichi a favor. "I understand." Ayatsuji Yukito agreed and headed downstairs. "I'll organize the case files and send them to your inbox." Ayatsuji Yukito accepted this matter, but it wasn't just because he felt responsible for it, there was more. "I also want to see Little Raccoon's work." Ayatsuji Yukito said regretfully, "I have a rough idea of his identity, but it's a pity he deleted all his works." Ayatsuji-sensei was on that forum too. Komaida Nagito wasn't too surprised. Did sensei ever contact Little Raccoon before? Ayatsuji Yukito said indifferently, "I didn't get along with him. He was too naive, and I wasn't interested in contacting him. I just wanted to read his novel." Komaida Nagito. "Sensei, you're too straightforward." No matter how you put it, Komaida Nagito was also helped by Ayatsuji Yukito. After receiving the parcel, he chose one of the case, rewrite the dry materials a little to make it look more like a puzzle, then translated it into English and sent it to Little Raccoon. After that, he went to have a meal. His ordered lunchbox had arrived. After finishing the lunchbox, Komaida Nagito returned to his computer and found that Little Raccoon had responded this time. Not only did Little Raccoon solve the puzzle, but they also asked him in English, "Are you Japanese?" "Yes." Komaida Nagito immediately replied. After that, there was no further response from the other side. Komaida Nagito thought that he couldn't leave it halfway, so he decided to redo with a different case again. He has to admit, Ayatsuji Yukito really knows how to pick interesting cases. This time, the Little Raccoon came back with the answer and then made a request. Next time, just use Japanese directly. After that, there was nothing further. No matter how much Komaida Nagito tried, there was no response. Recalling the forum comments about the Little Raccoon's poor social skills, Komaida Nagito didn't give up and sent over the last case as well. This time, no translation was needed, which saved him quite a lot of trouble. In response, he received only the detective work sent back to him, nothing more. Komaida Nagito pondered again. According to the strategy guide, continuing down this path would probably just lead to the same situation. Little Raccoon-san has no interest in anything outside of puzzles, ignoring even his true objective, and only responding to content that he himself finds interesting. This can't go on. Komaeda Nagito held a pen in his hand, tapping it against his notebook. The efficiency is too low, and the end isn't in sight. Who knows when he'll finally grind enough favorability to unlock the new novel. Komaeda Nagito threw down the pen and paper, leaned back in his chair, and closed his eyes, sinking into deep thought. Although Ayatsuji-sensei's case is quite interesting and has caught Little Raccoon-san's attention, at this level, wanting to take things further might be a bit difficult. Unless he presents something that Little Raccoon-san can't solve or makes a mistake solving. Or perhaps, gets stumped by a riddle. But Ayatsuji-sensei probably doesn't have such a scenario at hand, so he can only rely on his own memory. In other words, he still wants to write a book himself. In the end, it still comes down to this choice. But it could be considered as killing two birds with one stone. If things go smoothly, not only can he report the results of the mission to Kudo-kun, but he can also get closer to Little Raccoon-san. Maybe there will be some unexpected gains. Furthermore, he could fulfill Ayatsuji-sensei's wish by seeing Little Raccoon-san's new work. Actually, if it's the novel that even Ayatsuji-sensei wants to read, then he also wants to know what kind of novel it is. With that in mind, Komaeda Nagito went to grab some painkillers, just in case. Komaeda Nagito's current memory situation is a bit peculiar. It might be because of the excessive reason of memory reorganization, but he currently has both sets of memories very clear in his mind. The things he had forgotten, now, if he wants to recall them, he can. It almost feels as if they are happening right before his eyes, vivid and real. Especially in terms of recalling books, as long as he wishes, he can remember them almost word for word. However, if he tries to recall something from another world, he starts to get a headache. Moreover, the more he tries to recall things accurately, the more intense the headache becomes. This is because, the first time he talked about Natsume Soseki's book with Dazai Osamu, he didn't quote the original text but gave a general summary instead. Later, when he obtained the book in this world, he could directly cite the text without being influenced. The more he forgot, the more he tried to remember, and the more excruciating the headaches became. Finding the suitable novel from his lengthy memories clearly wasn't easy. Fortunately, since he had just called his former neighbor Ayatsuji Yukido, when thinking about this plan now, the first author that came to Komaeda Nagito's mind was Ayatsuji Yukido. Komaeda Nagito had also read quite a few works by Ayatsuji Yukido from another world, and the deepest impression wasn't from those avant-garde novels. Instead, it was from those cases that toyed with the reader's narrative expectations, earning the title of the Nightmare of Detective Masters, Dandanbashi, Ojita. Ayatsuji-sensei, thank you for the reminder, I know what I should do next. Let me borrow your name for a moment. Without hesitation, Komaeda Nagito brought his idea to reality. Based on his vague impressions, he wrote down the first case titled, Dandanbashi, Ojita, using his own words, then gradually worked through the pain that was becoming clearer. He recalled the details while perfecting the novel bit by bit. Although compared to the original work, there are definitely some differences, Komaeda Nagito really had a severe headache. Even though the short story didn't lack in word count, it was impossible to compare every single sentence. He read it once and felt that the content to be expressed was roughly accurate, with no bugs, so he figured it was fine. However, he still wasn't very reassured and decided to find someone to help check it. Therefore, Komaeda Nagito sent an email to Kudo Shinichi. Kudo-kun, I found a detective story that's quite interesting. Would you like to take a look? Kudo Shinichi replied quickly, sure, thank you, senpai. Komaeda Nagito immediately sent the newly written story as an attachment. On the other side, Kudo Shinichi was reading the newspaper, trying to find interesting news, not really expecting much while opening the email. He first glanced at the title and author. Dandanbashi, Ojita, author, Uchida Naoyuki. Who is Uchida Naoyuki? Never heard of him. Is he a Japanese mystery author? If it was well written, he would have been famous already. Not knowing that this was an alias for the famous mystery novelist Ayatsuji Yukito in another world, Kudo Shinichi's expectations for this story were even lower. Then, he began reading the story. Kudo Shinichi, despite the length, finished reading it fairly quickly. However, unlike his usual habit of deducing the culprit along the way or immediately getting the answer after reading, this time he was perplexed. Because no matter how he looked at it, this case just broke all of his reasoning. A child was pushed down a cliff, and there was a village near the cliff, with ABCD. Hold on. There were only 2 bridges linking the 2 sides of the valley, a suspension bridge and a single log bridge. After a skilled person crossed the suspension bridge, it was cut, leaving only the ropes, and these ropes couldn't bear the weight of an adult's body. At the same time, the witness claimed that during this period, they and their dog had been staring at the single log bridge, and no one crossed it. Who was it that pushed the child down? This novel even listed out the entire terrain map and the evidence of all the suspects not being at the scene at the very end, clear, with no intention of misleading. Kudo Shinichi stared at the novel, taking each person as a suspect and roll it over, but ultimately had to give up because the presented evidence contradicted itself. After a long while, he finally sent a reply to Komaida Nagito. Only F lacks an alibi and, in terms of logic, apart from him, no one else could have committed the crime. However, if the author dares to list all the alibis, it means they are confident that the alibi can't determine the culprit. But other than F, I really can't think of another answer. Kudo Shinichi, uncharacteristically anxious, awaited the reply, as he had a faint feeling that this was somehow different from the detective novels he had read up to now. Perhaps his answer was wrong. Komaida-senpai replied quickly. In less than 10 seconds, there was a response. It's B. Kudo Shinichi was immediately astonished. He quickly typed, how could it be B? Didn't the witness say that no one crossed the suspension bridge? The rope couldn't even bear the weight of an adult. Komaida-senpai replied just as quickly, because B is a gibbon. Kudo Shinichi. Kudo Shinichi felt as if his stomach was clogged with a rag, incredibly uncomfortable. He wanted to reply that the author was toying with the readers and that this wasn't a detective novel at all, but just as he was about to press send, he suddenly realized something. He went back and looked through the story once more. Earlier, there were indeed subtle hints. The novel from start to finish never directly mentioned that B is human. Whether it's the way others address B or the pronouns used for B, there was never an explicit indication that B is human. Even now, looking back, many things that were thought to be strange behaviors due to the rather remote location were actually hints about B's species. If you didn't already know the answer, the clever descriptions packaged all these suspicious details as merely some strange customs, and seeing them in such a straightforward manner wouldn't make you notice anything unusual. However, this kind of feeling of being played really made Kudo Shinichi very unwilling. He went back and forth looking at it 7 or 8 times, attempting to find a flaw, but each time he looked, he could confirm that the clues were truly sufficient, and the evidence did not conflict with each other. This was indeed a standard detective novel. To be precise, it was overly focused on emphasizing the twist through narrative deception. Because of the uneven level of quality in the literary market, although there were already pioneers in the field of narrative deception in detective novels, those who could play it well were still few. Most of them tried to learn but couldn't, and what they wrote would end up being the kind that readers would curse at after reading. Similar to Dandanbashi, Ojita, although Kudo Shinichi initially wanted to criticize it, the more he studied it, the more he admired it. Upon careful examination, he realized that unlike those authors on the market who, unable to write a proper detective story, attempted to experiment with unreliable narrations, this author clearly had the ability to write a solid detective story. The seemingly absurd unreliable narration in this story was, in fact, meticulously crafted. One could even say that it seemed like the author was mocking those so-called unreliable narrations on the market, whose level of coherence couldn't even compare to that of a guilty monkey. Kudo Shinichi looked at the new message that Komaida Nagito had sent, asking him if he found any flaws in the story. He thought about it, deleted the previous draft full of impulsive anger, and wrote a new reflection. He indicated that there were no flaws, and although the writing was somewhat immature, given the clever structure of the story, this minor defect didn't matter. He hoped the author would create more works in the future, and casually asked how Komaida Nagito found this author. Komaida Nagito replied that he came across the story by coincidence, and could no longer find the original source. Kudo Shinichi, although feeling that there was something off, understood that this response essentially meant there was no intention to answer. Therefore, he could only regretfully abandon this plan. Having received Kudo Shinichi's confirmation, Komaida Nagito finally felt assured enough to hand over the story to little Raccoon-san. Although Kudo-kun seemed satisfied, a short story was clearly not enough to express his gratitude. Writing another one was too exhausting for him, and he couldn't manage it. Better to see if little Raccoon-san could give some new reactions this time. This time, little Raccoon-san took clearly longer to reply, but it might just be a time zone difference. Komaida Nagito wasn't really sure which country the other person was from, and although they used English, it wasn't necessarily their native language. As for him, between translating and recalling memories, it took so long that he really couldn't take it anymore. After washing up and finding that he still hadn't recovered, he just went straight to sleep. The next day was Saturday, and Komaida Nagito finally got up after a lazy sleep. He went over to his desk, moved the mouse, woke up the computer, and then refreshed the message interface. He was shocked to discover that, despite seemingly having a social interaction disorder and appearing too aloof to care about others, the usually succinct little Raccoon-san, who rarely spoke, might have responded at length this time because of his delayed reply. This case is impossible. Everyone else could find evidence proving they aren't the culprits. It's certainly not F, the trap is too obvious. Your previous puzzles were impressive, what's going on this time? Who's Uchida Naoyuki? We've never heard of this person. Either the question itself has an issue, or we more or less missed something. Our Japanese might be the shortcomings. Please tell us the answer. The messages weren't just a few. The language gradually shifted from English to Japanese. Although there was an issue with the riddle, judging from how he was still struggling with the answer, little Raccoon-san likely knew that the riddle wasn't simply a bug. So Komaida Nagito sent over the answer. Little Raccoon-san only sent back a response after a long time, although I figured it might be a narrational trick, but Japanese. The others seemed to agree that this novel was indeed a detective novel, but they didn't think it was because they wasn't capable enough. Instead, they believed they lost due to their lack of proficiency in Japanese. However, narrative tricks and language play detective novels do indeed require a high level of language proficiency, so losing in this regard isn't really something to be ashamed of. Moreover, this work, Dandanbashi, Ojita, was meant to play with people from the very beginning. This time, before Komaida Nagito could try anything further, little Raccoon-san proactively resumed the conversation with him. We have a person we must defeat, a Japanese person. We originally thought our Japanese was good enough, but it seems we're still far from it. If you have similar works like this in the future, can you continue sharing them with us? We can use our works in exchange. After a day of running around, even taking painkillers, he finally achieved his original goal. Komaida Nagito let out a sigh of relief. Finally, he could report the results of his work, and it looked like he could return the favor to both Kudo-kun and Ayatsuji-sensei in one go. Sure enough, this was slightly more efficient compared to writing a full-length novel from another world. Can do, thank you very much. Komaida Nagito hadn't seen the other party's works before, but judging from others' reactions and Ayatsuji-sensei's response, he guessed the other person was quite formidable. So he casually gave a few compliments, then got to the main point. By the way, who is this person you said you must defeat? Are they famous? Little Raccoon-san replied. In Japan, he's quite well known. His name is Edogawa Ranpo. Chapter 37 End.